A peaceful evening in a calm urban neighborhood suddenly took a tragic turn, starting a chain of events that left Sarah, a woman in her 40s, and those close to her shocked. On a typical evening at Sarah's house, a story started. Her companion, George, who was also her ex husband, was with her. Although Sarah and George had been dating for around 3.5 years, their union was different. The relationship had never been accepted by George's family, who referred to Sarah as the blue eyed white devil. Despite this conflict among the family, Sarah and George were devoted to one another. Sarah and George decided to share a bottle of wine and engaged in several activities on this fateful evening. They spent the evening making art and putting together a jigsaw puzzle while enjoying one another's company and laughing. They had no idea that this seemingly ordinary night would quickly become tragic. They impulsively started playing a game of hide and seek as the night went on because of their lively spirits. The kind of joyful spontaneity that fosters thriving relationships was enjoyed by Sarah and George as they basked in the happiness of the moment. George thought it would be a funny touch to the game to get inside a large suitcase during the duration of the game. Sarah decided to entertain him and zip him inside the bag out of fun, and they both laughed at this strange twist on their game. But as the evening dragged on, Sarah got wary and decided to go upstairs to their bedroom. Exhausted, she dozed out for a long time and completely forgot about George, who was still confined to the suitcase downstairs. This unintentional error would start a chain of fatal occurrences. The next morning, when Sarah woke up, she initially believed that George was downstairs, possibly using his laptop. She was suddenly overcome with a sensation of dread and perplexity as she descended the stairs since George was nowhere to be found. Her memory abruptly came flooding back, reminding her of George's terrible prison time inside the luggage, and panic overwhelmed her. Sarah hurried to the luggage because she was terrified and opened it only to find George dead and unresponsive. She started performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR on him right away. She stayed on the line with 911 dispatch, desperately giving chest compressions. Her friend Brian was rushing to the area to offer assistance. Brian joined Sarah in performing CPR after he arrived and also dialed 911. Together, they made every attempt to revive George, but he did not get any better. Their sense of helplessness was made worse by audible sounds of air gurgling out of him. It was clear that George's condition was rapidly getting worse. The resuscitation operations were quickly taken up by paramedics, but despite their skill, George showed no indications of recovery. Sadly, he was declared deceased on the spot. Sarah was left in a state of shock and intense sorrow. Everyone concerned was in a state of shock and disbelief due to the mysterious circumstances surrounding George's passing. Sarah gave the law enforcement officials her complete cooperation while they looked into the unsolved death. She gave a thorough narrative of what had happened before the unfortunate tragedy, emphasizing it had been an accident. There was no sign of any underlying illness that would have contributed to George's demise. Despite her inner distress, Sarah permitted investigators to enter their home and gather data. Crime scene investigators carefully recorded the situation, taking pictures and closely examining the puzzle and artwork they had been working on the night before. Sarah's anxiousness grew in the meanwhile as she was concerned about George's family's response. She feared their criticism of her and their wrath because it had been a constant problem. She felt dreadfully anxious about having to tell them of George's passing. When the moment was right, the detectives gave Sarah their assurance that they would manage the delicate process of informing George's family. They emphasized that the truth would be told to his family while also offering her emotional assistance and reassurance. With guilt, fear, and loss on her mind, Sarah was left in a state of emotional upheaval. Sarah's close friend Brian, who had just arrived at the site, offered his unflinching support and aid as the investigation went on. When she first saw George in trouble, he was the one to phone her and advise her to dial 911. When she cried out for aid, Brian jumped to her side out of worry for her safety. As part of their investigation, the detectives dug further deeply into George's past and medical background. They discovered that in their 3.5 years together, George had never sought medical assistance or been admitted to a hospital. The only substantial medical procedure he had ever undergone was facial reconstruction surgery after a violent fight with his sibling. Other than that, his health appeared to be in good shape. Knowing she did not have any direct family to turn to for assistance added to Sarah's anxiousness. She was left alone with just 2 brothers, one serving in the military and the other in prison. After losing her parents, grandparents, aunt and uncle, Brian comforted her by suggesting that she spend the interim at his home. The detectives planned to notify George's family after the initial phase of the investigation was finished. They reaffirmed their commitment to openness and compassion while assuring Sarah that they would tell the whole story about his passing. Sarah was still paralyzed by fear. Though knowing that his family would probably react angrily with his hostility to the news, Sarah was still in a state of emotional upheaval as the detectives were getting ready to leave. She was anxious to learn what would happen next in the investigation and how she would have to contact George's family. Her shoulders were being weighed down by the awful conundrum of George's death, which had left her struggling with the shame, sorrow, and doubt.